filled with lots of sleep and food and quiet and trying to find space in the recycling bin for all the boxes and everything that somehow magically appeared. All right, so good morning. We are going to continue our study of at least this portion about the agriculture of 4th, 5th century, second temple period agriculture in Judea. Before we start, any prayer requests? No, Kevin is still, the Bay family is still needing prayers. So let's bow our heads. Holy God, we come before you and we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for the weather and just the opportunity to wake up and come and gather, listen to a portion of your word and learn about your world, your creation. We give you praise and glory for a beautiful week, and we pray that all those that we love and that are in our hearts, in our minds, that they're lifted up in glory to you, and that you remember them and watch over them. Our special prayers, especially for Kevin and Cindy, and we just ask that you be with the doctors and those that care for them and care for him, but let your will be done, and we rest in the comfort that all things are from you, through you, and because of you. We know that you have a plan for us. We remember that one of the earliest prayers that we find in the New Testament is, Lord, come quickly. We pray on that and ask that you be mindful of us, your creation. Thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the gathering together. Be with those that we lift up and need our prayers. We ask that you watch over those who of your creation that have not found you yet. We love them just as you love them. We ask that you watch over each and every one here. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so we are continuing our study. I'm going to, starting next, so just want to make an announcement that I am not going to be here next week. That was kind of a sudden change. So New Year's, we're going to be in Emporia, Kansas, so I think I'm going to have to get with the elders and so forth and figure out what's going to happen next week. Probably just going to be a combined class. I apologize for the short notice. It was kind of short notice to me too that I was going. So, but starting next year, which is next week, when I get back, we're going to continue on what we're doing, but I'm going to start working on developing or incorporating the scripture, Ezra and Nehemiah and the post-exilic writings. And we're going to kind of go through them at the beginning of class, just so that we understand what the understanding is of what the world of Judea and Jerusalem is. And that would be, there's debate whether Ezra came first or Nehemiah. I haven't really locked in either one of that down. The general consensus is that Ezra is the earlier of the two books that were written post-exilic. So that's more than likely where we're going to start. I am going to read this morning a section from the Wisdom of Solomon, which is an apocryphal book written post-exile. It's not incorporated in the standard Protestant canon. This is going to be from Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 15. My little section is titled, The Benefits of Worshiping the True God. But you, our God, are kind and true, patient and ruling all things in mercy. For even if we sin, we are yours, knowing your power. But we will not sin because we know that you acknowledge us as yours. For to know you is complete righteousness, and to know your power is the root of immortality. For neither has the evil intent of human art misled us, nor the fruitless toil of painters, a figure stained with varied colors, whose appearance arouses yearning in fools, so that they desire the lifeless form of a dead image. Lovers of evil things and fit for such objects of hope are those who either make or desire or worship them. So as we see, as we've talked about, there is this movement from, if we read in Deuteronomy, we read in the Torah, that there is this notion that there are other gods, but the God of Israel, the God of Judah, is more powerful. And then as we see the development, at least archaeologically and historically, there is a development now moving towards this idea of these gods, they're named gods, but they're not actual gods. So there's this canon or this religious development of the idea of gods, that each nation has a god. So the God of Israel, the God of Persia. And now we're developing this idea. There is this development post-exile, second temple period, where there is only one God, and all other gods are just, as they say, a figure stained with varied colors, whose appearances arouses yearning in fools, so that they desire the lifeless form of a dead image. So now these are just images, things that people worship, but they have no power. As post or pre-exilic, first temple period, and before that, there's this notion that there are other gods, but they're not as powerful as Adonai. And then you have the earliest archaeological evidence that points to each country has their own God, each nation, each peoples. So get into that. That's part of the development of the history of the archaeological. I'm looking at my notes, so I'm not looking at my phone to play my games. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we've been talking about the agriculture of the area. We're going to focus today, we're going to focus on two of the major crops, which are grapes and wheat. But before we get into that, I do want to talk, I want to get a little idea of, or just kind of a summary of the crops of Judea. So the Bible and rabbinic literature mention over 500 individual plant names throughout. I didn't know this either, so these are just notes that I found. So mentions 500 plant names and 150 species. So they may say wheat, but there's various different, like acorn wheat and barley wheat and so forth. So of the grain, there are 5 major crops that are grown in Judea: barley, rye, spelled wheat, and oats. And of course, the most important of those was wheat. Wheat is also the most difficult of those to grow. The easiest one to grow, according to agriculturalists, is barley. These are all native crops to the regions. And when I say native, they've been around for a couple thousand years. Historically, apparently, wheat comes from a little bit further to the east, but barley is actually one of the natural crops that grows in the region. Of course, my phone goes to sleep every 10 seconds. So, according to Josephus, and Josephus is a late 1st century Jewish historian, Jewish writer, and we get a lot of the history of Judea and the region from his writings. Common people ate barley and the rich people ate wheat. That's just kind of how it was, because it was much easier to grow, cheaper to grow the barley than the wheat was. Another important increase, this is later on, is rice that grows at the very end of the Second Temple period, that's brought in from other regions, especially when the Romans come in and they start bringing crops in from all over the known world at that point. The next major crop is legumes, and we think of beans, all the beans that we see in the store and so forth, but we have to understand that most of the beans that we see in the store are New World crops, so none of these crops really were around until after 1492. So the main crops, the main legumes of the region are peas, hummus, and the fava bean. So everybody who likes fava beans, I like fava beans. That's my thing. Those are Old World crops. These are really eaten as seeds. They are eaten boiled, roasted, and one of the easiest and most abundant crops to grow in the region. Lentils technically are not a legume, so I didn't really understand that, but lentils are another crop. They are not technically a legume, but very, very well grown. The two major vegetable crops were garlic and onions. I think we find garlic and onions in most foods these days. Those are really ancient, old world crops, grow very easily in the Levant. Spices, there were some spices, pepper. The notes I saw were pepper, but I actually have a friend of mine who is a agricultural archaeologist. He's telling me that pepper does not come into this area until late Second Temple with the Romans and the Persians at the very end, because pepper is grown in India and China. But it grows very easily, apparently, in the Middle East. The industrial crops, so these are crops that are grown strictly for industry. The main one, hemp. Most of us, those of us who understand hemp, comes from a weed, most commonly marijuana, that is grown for hemp, not for medicinal purposes, but it does have a medicinal purpose, which is understood nowadays as, in the vernacular, getting high, but it does have a medical purpose. So the big industrial plants are flax and hemp. Flax is another seed. We eat a lot of it because it's full of protein, but they use the plant itself, not the seeds, for industry, make rope, and so forth. Same thing with hemp. A lot of these plants are grown for for medicinal purposes, but perfumes as well. So, for example, persimmon. Anybody know what a persimmon plant looks like? So persimmon was actually grown for perfume, not for telling us, it's my understanding, it tells you when it's supposed to snow. But I don't know. Again, a note that I read. And then fruit trees, we've talked about them, the grape, the fig, dates, pomegranates. We didn't really talk about that, but as was mentioned at the end of class last week, most of these fruits can be found in the temple. So at the entrance of the temple, at the top of the columns at the building of the temple, you see representations of the pomegranate, the fig, the grapes, the date plant. All these are important. They're important to the people, but they're important for the temple as well. These are symbols of the gifts of God. So when the land of milk and honey was understood to contain more than just milk and honey. It contained a bunch of other things. And then again, the other fruit trees that were also grown for industrial purposes, the two main ones being grapes and olives. And we talked about olives last week a little bit, the importance being the oil used both in the temple, used for holy days, but also distributed around the world around the known world for industrial purposes. They made money off of it. We're going to talk about grapes because grapes become much more important in the word itself, and in the industry, in the need, and what helps to make fund the temple building. We got to remember the temple wasn't built, like they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. The temple wasn't built in a day. As we read in Ezra and Nehemiah, we learn that it happens in fits and in pieces. You get a start, and then there's a stop, start and a stop again, until you get about 70 to 90 years after the building begins construction, which is strange given that the first temple was built in only a few years, even though David doesn't live to see the creation, the final build of it. Questions about that summary of the agricultural produce products, and of course there's non-fruit trees that are very important, but important in growing things such as the cedars. They say the cedars of Lebanon, but Lebanon wasn't really developed. It was more of a couple of towns together. But cedars didn't just stop at the border. They kept on coming down, and cedar is a very important tree. Oak, as we talked about last week, more like the oaks you see down in Texas. They're shorter, scrubbier, more heat and heat tolerant and less water dependent than some of the oaks we know here in the Midwest. So the picture we have above, that is a wine press. We always think of wine presses as, at least I used to think of wine presses as a machine, but it's actually a room. So you have, and I've got some pictures going down, but wine, other than oil, wine is one of the most fundamental crops grown in the Levant, Second Temple, because as we discussed briefly last week, water is not safe. And when we talk about wine, we're not talking about 14% alcohol all the time. Most wine consumed, according to archaeological studies, historians, we're talking about near wine, maybe 2%. Wine was given to children. Wine was consumed at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, at almost every means possible. Because even if you diluted the wine that you had with water, which was unsafe, it generally made the water safer because they don't have the filtration process. So there is an ongoing bacterial or yeast presence in wine and in the various drinks that they make out of the grapes and out of the other produce, because they do make a fig wine. They do juice some of these pomegranates and so forth. But again, grapes are the easiest product to grow. You get the most abundance. If anybody's ever seen a pomegranate tree, it's about a standard tree, gets to be about 15 feet tall, produces fruit just like an apple tree does in that sense. But you can, in that same space, you can grow roughly my understanding is 10 to 15 grape plants and get twice as much produce. Okay? And it's easier, because all you got to do is, as the wine press demonstrates, you just need space to step on them. Pomegranates, you got to peel, you got to pull. I was messing with a pomegranate over the holidays, so I had pomegranate juice all over my fingers and the little white pith everywhere. And picking pith out of my teeth while eating pomegranates was not fun, but happens. So grapes are very easy to use. Figs, same thing. You have a lot of skin compared to the juice and the other product of these plants. So grapes, according to those who know, are much easier. Okay, much easier to harvest, much easier to produce a juice from. So wine is essential. It's essential for the temple. It's essential for everyday life. It's essential for everything, because again, at the end of the day, as I mentioned last week, you don't know if Farmer Joe's got his sheep crop or his goats, down creek or down river, so you don't know what's in the water. And not only are the goats utilizing that water, so are the sheep herders, so are the people. So when you know that the grapes have been above ground, they are up in the air, they're not contaminated. The other thing is the natural yeast, because again, and I didn't know this until a couple years ago, yeast, the science of cultivating yeast is only about 150 years old. So before that, it was pretty much, we let it out, we just lay it out there and let God, let the yeast, the natural wild yeast, ferment things. Which is why you had the various fermentation levels. So you had some yeast, there were some areas that had, a higher alcohol concentration because you had more yeast, and it also depended on the season. Yeast like a day like today. It's moist and it's warm. They're not going to like a day like tonight, where it's going to be cold and dry. Okay? So you have seasonal actions going on as well. All of this is way beyond my knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, the people 2,000, 3,000 years ago didn't understand it either, but they understood that it worked. And they repeated the process over and over, not just 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. And it worked for them. And it didn't kill them, because they realized, hey, Joe over there who's drinking the water from that mountain spring, Joe doesn't have any kids. In fact, Joe doesn't exist anymore because he's died of dysentery, of typhus. These are all very common diseases. You read stories in the Middle Ages of people who die from these diseases. It's because which is weird to me, they don't have access to they don't have access to clean water, but they don't have access to water alternatives. Anybody watch Ken Burns? Again, my ADHD kicks off. Ken Burns did the Revolutionary War, came out on PBS a couple weeks ago. There's a section where he talks about the prison ships that are in Boston Harbor, and that many people many of the prisoners die of dysentery and typhus and so forth. It's because they didn't have access to clean drinking water. And the British and the Americans in their prison boats, in their prison camps, Camp Andersonville, Civil War, prison camp, notorious, no access to clean drinking water, no access to drinking water alternatives. So the diseases that are waterborne, typhus, dysentery, those diseases run rampant when you don't have access to clean water. The ancient peoples, the peoples of this region, the peoples throughout the world, learned this through trial and error, unfortunately. Lots of error, but through trial. So these things become very important to people. It's on. Just takes a second. Okay, so just real quick history. Wine is first produced about 8,000 years ago in the area of Mesopotamia during the biblical times, Iron Persian Age. Wine industry is widespread throughout the Holy Land and is one of the largest exports. The Old Testament is permeated with references to wine, winemaking, and wine presses. The first references of Noah, the world's first winemaker, and Noah planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and we know, unfortunately, the story that follows. Initially, wine presses are small and installed in fields near the vineyards. That was kind of one that you saw. That's considered a small wine press. Normally cut into the local stone. Some villages evolve around the wine presses, become cities bearing the name of the wine press. And then they grow and they grow and they grow. These villages evolving around wine presses, it's not just wine presses that develop villages. You have olive groves, fig groves, and it's not just the Levant, it's not just Judea, it's throughout the world. You have Egypt, you have Central Asia, you have the Near East, the Far East, all throughout. You have these clusters of wine presses. You even have clusters of it's not as prevalent in Judea, but there is beer making as well. Again, this is near beer, not the beer you see at the grocery store or whatever. This is leftover barley or wheat that is left over and then ferments and becomes a drink that they drink. Again, you're using everything and anything that you can find to survive. So, but you have the names of these villages, and you have these villages springing up. They primarily spring up around access to water, even though it may not be clean, it's needed for things, and food. Essential, you can build a house, you can build a temple. That's not going to feed you. It's not going to keep you alive, and that's in the physical sense. So it becomes important. So the structure of the wine press, and we're going to look at some pictures in a second. I just couldn't get it all to fit and be able to read, because I know you can barely read that as well. Structure of the wine press, you have the collection area, so that's where the grapes are brought in from the vineyard. It's normally a large flat area near the wine press on the outside of the building itself. It's just, storage area. Everybody brings in their harvest, kind of lays it out. Then you have the treading floor, which is kind of what we saw in that initial picture, the big square area. It's a large area, normally covered with mosaics. So a lot of the archaeological sites, the excavation sites, you will actually see mosaics, which are just little colored tiles, just paintings and so forth on the floor of the, I'm saying it right, mosaics are like little tile pictures. Right. Okay. So those are on the floor, and then again, they didn't roll around with a stone. You just hired your cousin or your brother. You got your little sister in there, and you pushed her down and rolled her around or something like that, and crushed the grapes that way, or your little brother. I had two of them. So the use of shoes was avoided. Juice, together with the crushed grapes, were left for preliminary fermentation, and then the use of shoes was avoided in order to prevent crushing the grape seeds, which would have made the wine bitter. There was a small hole in the center, and I'm going to go back real quick because I've got some other pictures, but that says small hole, but that hole in the middle is the small hole that they're talking about. Secondary crushing of the grapes, and using a single fixed screw press, the press squeezed out the must, so anything left in the grape skins and stalks after treading. That was a note that I copied. There was optional pole holes on the side of the floor to provide shade for the workers. So this wasn't a building in the sense that it was an enclosed building. This was just something you put out near the field because it was essential. But you weren't going to waste your time building an entire building just for this, that it remains unused during the seasons or the times where you're not using it. Okay, so then you have a pipe that lets the juice flow down to a collecting pool through a filter. Again, this is all stone. There's no, they didn't build a stainless steel vat or anything like that. This is stone. A filter hole that's used to block the juice, and then only let the juice flow through. Excuse me. The collecting pool, that's where the juice gets together, and it undergoes a secondary fermentation process, usually covered by a mosaic floor and covered, and the pool is lower than the treading floor, so everything goes down naturally. Steps that lead to the bottom of the pool. So for me, reading all this and accumulating these notes, it's not a 10 by 10 square. This appears to be a pretty big location. You need steps to get to the bottom of the pool to collect the juice into jars, and then the jars for subsequent fermentation, and then a storage area such as a cave to store the jars. Because again, it's just like everything, if you leave it out in the sun, it gets hot, it'll go bad fast, it'll spoil faster. So, here's another picture, the hole where the juice flows into, and then they put the press in there. That is for the second crushing to get the must, which is the leftovers from the grape skins. And the treading floor. And this is about as big as I could get it, but if you look at the very top, maybe can we turn down the lights a little bit, if you don't mind? Might be a little bit easier to see. Thank you. At the very top are steps. You kind of see the 3 steps going down. There is a filter there, so the flow is going, I think the flow is going down towards the pool. So at the very bottom it says juice flows down here. So it goes down there over the mosaics, so those are the little tiles, through the filter and into the pool. And then the workers go down into the steps and they scoop out the wine and put it in jars there. I know you can't read this, but this is a brief sample, and I'm just going to give you the citations in case you're interested. I can send these out. Biblical references to wine. Numbers 18:27, and it's really about the wine press, not about the wine. And this, your heaved offering shall be reckoned unto you as though it were the corn of the threshing floor and as the fullness of the winepress. So in Numbers, you have Numbers 18:27, and in 30, Deuteronomy, Judges, 2 Kings, Job, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Hosea, and Zechariah. These are just some examples of where the winepress is mentioned in the Bible. And again, the numbers in Deuteronomy, this is the Torah, this is the book of the law. So it's prevalent, and it's pretty straightforward that the wine press itself is something that's important, or at least familiar enough that the people will understand its importance and why it's included. Questions about wine and its importance in the archaeological record. The brief summary. I mean, obviously there's whole courses and catalogs and degrees in the study of wine and its importance. All right, so the third major crop that we're going to talk about, maybe the fourth, wheat, particularly emmer wheat, which I didn't realize that there were different types of wheat, but I mean, I knew there was a couple, but I didn't know about this one. Emmer wheat is a cornerstone grain in ancient Judea and throughout the Fertile Crescent. It is known as the mother wheat, and it's crucial for biblical times, used for the matzah and nutrition, its importance through its cultivation, though its cultivation has declined with modern wheat, and that's just more genetics, and it's easier, these other wheats are now easier to grow. It is seen a resurgence in ancient flavors and health benefits, while varieties are still found throughout the Levant region. Wild emmer is native to the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East, growing in the grass and woodland hills of the country from modern-day Israel to Iran. The origin of wild emmer has been suggested without universal agreement among scholars to be the Karakadağ mountain region of southeastern Turkey, which is not far from the region we are talking about. So still Middle Eastern Levant region. Emmer wheat has been found in archaeological excavations and ancient tombs. And again, that's just a picture of what wild emmer wheat looks like. If anybody is familiar with modern wheat, you don't have as much of the stalk, which is the little fronds growing out of it. That's part of why they say that the modern wheat is more productive, because you have more wheat heads. So, emmer wheat in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, is kusumet. We read in Genesis about Joseph's brothers traveling to Egypt for emmer. It is the only wheat, historically and archaeologically, that is cultivated in ancient Egypt. It was used in the original matzah, since it was the only type of wheat grown in ancient Egypt, and it was used for bread offerings, the lechem panim, in the temple. Emmer has been found in earthen jars in Jericho caves, stored by the Bar Kokhba rebels, which we'll talk about, fleeing the Romans in 135 CE. So, as you can see, emmer wheat is vital. Again, it is one of the vital plants, agricultural products for the temple. You have the showbread, you have the matzah. So this wheat, obviously, we all are familiar that bread is one of the most important things that humans have produced throughout. It's what has kept us alive for millennia. The historical significance of wheat excuse me, in Judea is, so the mother wheat, em-ha-hita, means mother wheat, highlighting its ancient importance. It's primary wheat eaten by biblical Israel, grown extensively until the end of the Iron Age around 500 BCE, where you have the introduction of other cultivated wheat products. But again, wheat still is vital. It's not just the specific type of wheat. Matzah and temple offerings, the original matzah and the temple bread were made from emmer, as it is the main wheat in ancient Egypt and Israel. And as we've discussed before, Israel and Egypt are not just neighbors, they're integrated peoples. Egyptians, they intermarry with, people from Judea, Judeans. And then, during the exile, not everybody goes to Persia. Not everybody's arrested. Some people move down to Egypt, and they remain in Egypt. To this day, they remain in Egypt. And again, I'm not going to get into the nutrition for wheat, but it's actually higher in protein and fiber and micronutrients as compared to modern wheat products. And it's considered excellent food for all ages, obviously. I mean, you're not going to not feed your kids. This is a picture I found of a gentleman somewhere in modern Israel holding stalks of emmer wheat. So it is cultivated. Emmer grains have a protective hull that needs to be removed, dehulled. Has anybody ever seen like how they do it in the old ways? It's yeah. No, well, they start with the shoveling. They cut it with a scythe, and then they fluff it, get all the loose stuff out. But wheat doesn't like to be detached. I saw went down a rabbit hole, and saw about 30 minutes of video of. So in the ancient days, they just smacked it against the rocks. And that's kind of how they initially broke it up, and then they would, chaff it or, hull it again. But it is a very labor-intensive, action, and it takes a long time for the heads to finally disperse, and then you have to get rid of all the stuff that isn't digestible, which in those days wasn't as thorough. So you get a lot of fiber in your diet back in those days. It is the ancestor to modern wheat. It's a precursor to durum wheat, which is the most common modern wheat we have nowadays. And again, it's resilient. This wheat is actually not much more. This wheat, my studies show that it is less water dependent. So you don't need as much water to grow as you do modern varieties. Another problem with modern technology. Okay, so we've kind of talked about agriculture. We're going to talk a little bit, I'm just going to kind of finish this out. I didn't get pictures up. So there were some corrections. I know a couple weeks ago I said that some of the notes I had seen showed that these agricultural plots, especially Second Temple, are much smaller than what we would consider nowadays. And that is true. The numbers I had were wrong. So on average, so before I do this, if anybody is interested in biblical archaeology, there is a international organization called Biblical Archaeology, Biblical Archaeological Studies, or Biblical Archaeological Studies Society, BAS. If you go to BAS, you can subscribe for free, and you get daily or weekly updates about various things of interest in the archaeological study of the biblical region. It is not just Judean or Israelite or Christian studies. So there's information about the Persians because, again, as I've talked about, all of these things are interactive in the sense that they interacted with other people. But majority of the studies, majority of the information is either Jewish or Christian in nature. That being said, there was a really great article this week about Bethlehem, the city of Bethlehem. And the initial study or the initial information that I had read, obviously from the source that I had read the source I read and realized was like from 1981. So the numbers were a little off. The article was talking about the city of Bethlehem being a proper city and not a village. And the Bethlehem is approximately 17 hectares large, as opposed to 4 hectares, which is what I had read earlier. 17 hectares, a hectare is, I always forget this, is roughly 2.5 acres. So you're looking at roughly 50 acres of space. And again, it doesn't sound like a large location, and it's not.